Have you ever wondered why, despite their shared origins, Jews and Arabs appear to be in constant conflict? It is nearly impossible to watch the news without hearing about new tensions and conflicts. But few people realize that this millennia-long conflict extends far beyond geographical issues and theological divisions. A deeply embedded story from ancient times exists, a familial rivalry that has spanned centuries and continues to impact today's geopolitical scene. And the most interesting part? This is a little-known story, but it shows a lot about the motivations and ideas that fuel this struggle. If you want to know why the world is the way it is now and learn the untold story behind one of history's longest-running battles, this film is for you. By watching, you'll have a better understanding of the origins of this rivalry, as well as the lessons it teaches us about resilience, faith, and the power of reconciliation. Stay with us to the finish, and you'll leave with not only a fresh perspective on history, but also practical lessons to implement in your own life. And if you love content that makes you think deeply and see the world from a fresh perspective, please subscribe to our channel and enable notifications. Together, we can explore tales that not only inform, but also transform us, and your support will enable us to provide you with more thought-provoking content. With so much conflicting information, it's tempting to assume that this fight is fresh. However, in actuality, it is a shadow that dates back to biblical times. Consider the conflict between two nations, both descended from the same patriarch, Abraham, but taking such diverse roots that they became unstoppable competitors. Few people realize that this conflict began in the heart of a family, between two brothers named Isaac and Ishmael, rather than on battlefields. This is the narrative you're about to discover, one of the supernatural promises, family feuds, and, most importantly, how yesterday's decisions continue to influence today's realities. Ishmael, a name that echoes throughout history, is an important character in Jewish, Christian, and Islamic faiths. Each of these religions highlights distinct aspects of Ishmael's life, but they all agree on one thing. He was Abraham's firstborn, born to Sarah's servant Hagar. It's fascinating how Ishmael's fate, while perhaps eclipsed by people like Isaac, is critical to understanding the interplay between these great religious traditions. His story is more than just a historical document. It exemplifies how divine promises may affect generations. As we study religious writings, we view Ishmael as the archetype of the son on the verge of destiny, predestined to be the father of a great nation. The promise provided to Abraham to be the father of many was not restricted by human norms or straight bloodline, but continued via Ishmael. Imagine Abraham's faith being challenged by accepting that Hagar's son, not simply Sarah's, would be included in this tremendous promise. This story teaches us an important lesson about faith and tenacity, which we may use in our daily lives when faced with apparently insurmountable problems. Although Ishmael is addressed more extensively in the Quran, he is just as prominent in Judeo-Christian scriptures. In Genesis, his story is written in such a way that Hagar and Ishmael play prominent parts in a high-tension situation. This causes us to focus on the family complications that frequently arise in our own lives. How many of us confront family issues where competing expectations and promises collide? Have you had similar family conflicts? We would love to hear your ideas in the comments section below. Ishmael's story reminds us that even in the midst of chaos, a supernatural hand guides each step. The Quran, in turn, provides an even more detailed account of Ishmael's life, elevating him to the role of prophet and highlighting his piety and loyalty to God. It's remarkable how this perspective complements the Judeo-Christian heritage, resulting in a complex and colorful tapestry of views. Ishmael is more than just a historical figure. He is a symbol of resilience and fidelity, teaching us the value of keeping our faith even when the path ahead appears uncertain. Finally, Ishmael's experience allows us to better appreciate divine promises and the obstacles they present. His life, which is rife with themes of faith, family, and destiny, serves as an excellent starting point for exploring the promises God made to Abraham and the consequences of those promises in the lives of others around him. Let us now look at how God's promise to Abraham influenced not only Ishmael's life, but also that of an entire nation that still carries his name. The heavenly promise made to Abraham is one of the most intriguing pillars of religious traditions, weighing destiny and requiring unflinching trust. Imagine hearing directly from God that your descendants will be as numerous as the stars in the sky, especially because that promise was impossible to fulfill in human terms. Abraham, already advanced in age, had every reason to be skeptical, but he decided to believe. That choice, that faith, is something we can apply in our own lives, particularly when we are asked to trust in something that appears out of reach. The primary element of this promise was not merely the birth of a child, but the formation of an entire nation through his family. Abraham was chosen to be the patriarch of a people that would bring blessings into the world. However, the path to such satisfaction would not be easy. Life continually demonstrates that great promises are met with severe hardships, and Abraham's journey was no exception. He had to deal with personal misgivings, external pressures, and most importantly, the test of time. How frequently do we find ourselves in the same situation, waiting for something promised, but yet to be delivered? What promises have you been waiting for in your life? Please share your experiences in the comments. This pledge also demonstrates the essence of the divine covenant, which is unconstrained by time or circumstance. By accepting this promise, Abraham entered into a covenant that extended beyond his own life and influenced future generations. This kind of commitment is uncommon and significant, and it can motivate us to make lasting commitments and covenants, whether with God or with those around us. We, like Abraham, are expected to look beyond the present moment and consider the long-term consequences of our actions and commitments. Abraham's status as the father of nations also pushes us to consider the responsibility that comes with being a member of something larger than ourselves. It is not only important to receive blessings, but also to be a blessing to others. Abraham's story reminds us that God's promises are complex, benefiting both the direct recipient and those who follow. It's like planting a tree whose fruits will be enjoyed by future generations. Finally, the promise given to Abraham teaches us the value of patience and faith, particularly when circumstances appear to contradict what has been promised to us. Just as Abraham waited years to see the promise fulfilled, we are frequently challenged to wait and believe, even when it appears far. And it is this patience, this unshakable faith, that prepares us for what follows. The obstacles that aging presented to Abraham and Sarah, as well as how they faced with the contradiction between heavenly promise and human reality. Aging is a natural process that presents a number of physical and emotional obstacles. These problems were especially difficult for Abraham and Sarah because God's promise of a child appeared to be nearly impossible to fulfill given their advanced age. Imagine the weight of that waiting as the years passed, and the truth of their aging grew more apparent. The contrast between heavenly promise and human limits prompts us to consider how we handle our own expectations and the passage of time. Abraham and Sarah, like any relationship, experienced periods of doubt and worry. After all, how can you have faith in a promise when physical evidence appears to contradict it? This is a question that many of us face at different periods in our lives, particularly when dealing with the impacts of aging. However, their experience shows us that true faith is not dependent on circumstances, but rather on unshakable trust in the divine purpose. It's a profound lesson that can motivate us to maintain optimism even when reasoning tells us differently. The protracted wait for a child, especially in an era where offspring were regarded as a blessing and a continuance of one's lineage, must have been a grueling ordeal for Abraham and Sarah. They suffered not just social rejection, but also the quiet misery that comes with realizing that time is running away. This experience of fighting against time teaches us that the biggest miracles can occur when we least expect them, when we have exhausted all of our strength and options. It is at this stage when supernatural intervention becomes most visible and effective. Furthermore, the aging of Abraham and Sarah symbolizes human fragility in the face of heavenly purposes. With each passing year, God's promise became farther distant, and they were forced to deal with the frustration of not knowing when or even if the promise would be fulfilled. This sense of vulnerability is something we all experience at various points in our lives. How can we learn from their experience and apply their tenacity to our own challenges? What lessons about resilience have you learned from your personal experiences? Feel free to post them in the comments. Perhaps the answer comes in admitting our limitations while still believing in what lies beyond us. The struggle against aging and the longing for a miracle brings us directly to Sarah's critical decision to propose that Abraham conceive a child with Hagar. This idea, formed out of desperation and anger, marked a turning point in Ishmael's journey and paved the way for new difficulties. Let us now look into Sarah's proposition and the consequences it has for this family. Sarah's proposition to Abraham to have a child with Hagar was a brave gesture, motivated by intense frustration and a desire to see the heavenly promise realized, even if indirectly. This seemingly desperate suggestion tells much about the demands and expectations of the time, particularly for a woman who was unable to conceive. Sarah's decision was an attempt to resolve the conflict between God's promise and the reality of her own infertility. This type of decision, which is often motivated by a combination of despair and pragmatism, is represented in many aspects of our lives. The birth of Ishmael, the product of Abraham and Hagar's relationship, raised significant concerns of loyalty and power within their family. Hagar, being the mother of Abraham's kid, began to have a prominent role, which eventually caused conflict between her and Sarah. These family dynamics demonstrate how actions taken under pressure can have far-reaching and long-lasting implications in our lives. How often do we make difficult decisions in order to solve an immediate problem, only to discover that we have created additional challenges in the process? Sarah began to feel the weight of her decision when she saw Hagar pregnant and noticed the change in the family dynamic. The already fragile connection between the two women deteriorated further, prompting Hagar to leave for the desert. This flight was a watershed moment, but it also provided an opportunity for Hagar to forge her own path, guided by a supernatural promise. Sarah's decision was thus not an isolated act, but rather the catalyst for a chain of events that would influence Ishmael's fate and that of his whole lineage. Sarah's approach also prompts us to consider how we deal with our own limitations and disappointments. When standard methods appear to be ineffective, we are frequently driven to take dramatic actions in the expectation that they may solve our issues. However, Sarah's narrative teaches us that such actions might have unintended consequences, and that it is sometimes important to trust in time and divine intentions rather than attempting to force a solution. The friction between Sarah and Hagar, as well as the ramifications of this suggestion, usher in a new chapter in the lives of Hagar and Ishmael. As they escaped into the desert, confronting the unknown, they came across divine intervention that promised to change their lives. Let's now look at Hagar's struggle in the desert and the promise she got. In the depths of her anguish, Hagar's journey into the desert was an act of desperation, an attempt to escape the intolerable tensions that had developed within Abraham's family. Consider the hardship she had, not only as a servant, but also as the mother of Abraham's child, facing the loneliness and uncertainty of the desert. This voyage represents the moments when we feel abandoned and lost, experiencing life's most difficult problems with no certainty of a joyful ending. However, it is frequently in these darkest moments that divine involvement is most apparent. In the middle of the desert, Hagar was on the verge of collapse when an angel appeared to her with a message of hope. He not only soothed her, but also offered a tremendous promise. Her son, Ishmael, would be the father of a great nation. This meeting reminds us that even in the most terrible situations, a higher power is working in our favor, opening the road for something better than we can conceive. Hagar's narrative shows us that even when everything appears lost, faith may lead us back to the correct way. The promise provided to Hagar included not just survival, but also affluence and purpose. Her son, Ishmael would not only survive the desert, but would go on to head a mighty nation. This is something we can apply in our own lives. Even when we are overwhelmed by our circumstances, we must remember that there is a larger purpose at work, something that might transform our apparent defeat into a huge win. We, like Hagar, can draw strength from the promise that our suffering will not be in vain. Hagar's trek across the desert also demonstrates the value of perseverance and faith in a better future. She could have given up and bowed to despair, but she decided to believe in the promise made to her. This is a decision we all face in our lives, especially when obstacles appear overwhelming. Hagar's narrative inspires us to keep going and to find strength inside ourselves, even when everything else appears to be coming apart. Finally, Hagar's meeting with the angel in the desert prepares the way for the next chapter in Ishmael's life. Growing up in the desert, away from the pressures of Abraham's family, Ishmael gained abilities that would define his own and his descendants' futures. Let us now look at Ishmael's life in the desert, his accomplishments, and how he became the father of 12 powerful tribes. Ishmael grew up in the desert, a dry and hostile environment that, strangely, honed his strength and resilience. From a young age, he learned to deal with the difficulties of existence in a region where only the strongest prosper. Life in the desert, away from the intrigues and tensions of Abraham's family, allowed Ishmael to develop talents that made him more than just a survivor, but also a natural leader. This childhood exemplifies how adversities may often become our most valuable assets, preparing us to face the future with courage and commitment. Ishmael did not only survive in the desert, he thrived. He honed his hunting skills and earned admiration for his daring. These characteristics identified him as a leader among the desert peoples, and he eventually became the father of 12 sons, each of whom established tribes that would become the major Arab states. It's remarkable to watch how a seemingly hopeless scenario turned into such a great legacy. Ishmael reminds us that no matter how difficult the circumstances, we can convert them into chances for growth and leadership. Ishmael's parenthood also contains significant meaning. His 12 sons, the founders of diverse Arab tribes, symbolize Abraham's promise to be the father of many countries. Ishmael's life is thus not only a story of personal victory, but also of how a divine promise may be passed down through generations, influencing the fate of entire peoples. This concept of legacy is something we can employ in our daily lives, noting that our actions and decisions today might have long-term consequences for those who follow us. Living in the desert also provided Ishmael with independence that he would have lacked if he had remained in Abraham's home. Away from the social and cultural constraints of his period, he was able to establish himself as an authoritative figure, admired for his power and knowledge. This autonomy is a striking example of how being removed from difficult situations can help us to grow and develop our genuine capacities. Ishmael's experience in the desert teaches us the necessity of following our own path, even if it takes us far from comfort and security. As Ishmael established himself as a leader and patriarch, the previously unresolved familial problems persisted. The arrival of Isaac, Abraham, and Sarah's son introduced further problems that led to Ishmael's permanent estrangement from his paternal family. Let us now look at these intricate familial dynamics and how they influence the lives of Ishmael and Isaac. The family relationships of Ishmael, Isaac, Abraham, and Sarah are one of the most intriguing and complicated chapters in the Bible. The birth of Isaac, Abraham, and Sarah's son exacerbated the already high tension in Abraham's household. Ishmael, as the firstborn, was now in a precarious situation in which the coming of his half-brother jeopardized his status and the future he had planned for himself. These family dynamics, fraught with rivalries and resentments, represent many of the difficulties that exist in families today, when biological ties do not always ensure harmony. As Isaac matured, Sarah became increasingly anxious about Ishmael's status in the family. Sarah feared that Ishmael, Abraham's first son, would undermine Isaac's position as the heir to the divine promises. Sarah's worry compelled Abraham to make a bold decision: remove Hagar and Ishmael. This situation, which is distressing for everyone concerned, serves as a reminder that fear and uncertainty, rather than love and compassion, frequently drive the most difficult family decisions. The exile of Hagar and Ishmael was a watershed moment in both of their lives, as well as a definite separation between Abraham's two branches of kin. Ishmael was compelled to abandon everything he knew and isolate himself from his father, who, though hesitant, obeyed heavenly orders to protect Isaac. This tragedy was not just a physical exile, but also an emotional one, causing a schism that would have far-reaching consequences for future generations. Many families suffer for years, if not generations, as a result of such judgments. Despite the anguish of separation, Ishmael and Hagar were able to establish their lives away from the influence of Abraham and Sarah. Ishmael's perseverance, honed in the harsh conditions of the desert, enabled him to not only survive, but also thrive in his new existence. This ability to adapt and prosper in the most difficult conditions demonstrates the strength of determination and faith. Ishmael, despite being separated from his family, was able to establish his own legacy, demonstrating that even when we are cut off from our roots, we can find the strength to grow and leave our mark. Finally, the conflicts between Ishmael and Isaac, as well as their subsequent separation, did not conclude the story. Despite their troubles, the two brothers eventually reconciled, finding a means to reunite to bury their father, Abraham. This reconciliation, however brief, provides hope that even in the most divided families, healing and reconciliation are always possible. Let's now look at Ishmael's final years and how he and Isaac overcame their disagreements to honor their father in his last hours. Ishmael's latter years demonstrate perseverance and reconciliation. After a life full of trials, from being expelled from his family to establishing a nation in the desert, Ishmael eventually found serenity in his latter years. Ishmael preserved his dignity and identity, despite the significant physical and emotional distance between him and Abraham's household. This stage of his life shows us that no matter how difficult our road has been, there is always room for improvement and introspection. In the last moments, Ishmael and his half-brother Isaac's relationship, which had been defined by tensions and conflicts throughout their lives, reached an unexpected conclusion. Despite the tough circumstances that had separated them, the two brothers were able to reconcile before Abraham died. This act of reconciliation, in which they both came together to bury their father, serves as a strong reminder that even the most difficult family ties have the opportunity for healing. The narrative of Ishmael and Isaac encourages us to seek reconciliation in our own lives, even if the scars appear too deep to repair. Ishmael and Isaac's reconciliation was more than just emotional closure. It was also a reciprocal acknowledgement of respect and shared beginnings. By burying Abraham together, they respected his father's heritage and acknowledged that, despite their differences, they were all part of the same tale. This moment of unification tells us that, in the end, what binds us is greater than what separates us. In our own lives, we may implement this lesson by appreciating our connections and working to bridge the gaps that occasionally separate us from individuals we care about. Ishmael's final years were also spent ensuring that his family's history would continue. He watched his sons grow and establish themselves as tribe leaders, fulfilling the promise made to him in the desert that he would become the father of a powerful country. This sense of continuity and success gave Ishmael the assurance that, despite all the hurdles, he had accomplished the goal set for him. This section of his biography inspires us to consider our own legacy and how our actions today will affect future generations. Finally, Ishmael's journey, from his early years to his death moments, exemplifies how faith, resilience, and reconciliation can change people's lives. Despite experiencing so many challenges, Ishmael found serenity and left a lasting legacy. As a result, his life prepares us to consider the themes of war and reconciliation, which are still present in the stories of nations and families today. Now that we have a clearer grasp of Ishmael's trip, let us look at how these tensions continue to appear in the conflict between Jews and Arabs, as well as what we may learn from this ancient story. After everything we've covered, it's evident that the story of Ishmael and Isaac is more than simply an ancient history. It's a living lesson in how yesterday's decisions impact the present. Now that you have a thorough understanding of the story, the key question is how you will use what you've learned. Can we learn from these blunders and find a way to reconciliation in our own lives? If Ishmael and Isaac could reconcile, why can't we do the same with those with whom we disagree? The truth is that history demonstrates that wars, no matter how ancient or deep, are not inevitable. They can be conquered if we recognize their core causes and choose to behave wisely. And you, how will you apply this knowledge to improve your relationships and possibly inspire people around you? Think carefully, because what you do with this information may have a greater influence than you realize. Thank you for joining us on this journey of history and religion. If you haven't already, subscribe to our channel and enable notifications to ensure you don't miss out on future content that challenges you to see the world from fresh angles.